To these formulas up here. Okay. What I'm going to show you are the three things that you need to do in order to get to the perfect square trinomials factored. But with these, your answers are going to look like a binomial squared because there's going to be two of the matching ones. So if you do factor the longer way by grouping, they both would just be matching, which you may write as a binomial squared, or you can write as two of the same ones. So regardless of which way you would factor these, there would be 2x plus 4s. With this one, there would be 2n minus 3s. So you can write that as a quantity squared. Okay. That would indicate it's a perfect square trinomial. So you can do the factoring we did last week. This is just if you notice. If you notice at the bottom of the paper on the front side, those numbers are very large. Okay. But they have certain characteristics to them. So this is where you at least want to be paying attention. If it was on your factoring test and you didn't really notice it and you just factored like normal, the answer should come out the same. This is a tool to use if need be. So refer back to these steps as needed. So make sure the trinomial's in standard form. So descending order, highest power to lowest power. Always check for a GCF first if possible. If you notice the first and last term are perfect squares, meaning you can take the even square root of them, this may work. There's a third thing that you have to check out. All right, so you would write down the square roots of both of them, and we're going to do this for all four of these up here. You're going to multiply the square roots together and then multiply by 2 to see if that product matches the middle term. Write as two matching binomials with the sign of the middle term, or write as one binomial squared. Okay. So for these, again, you can just go into A times C and do it that way. It will come out the same. But again, if you look down at problem D, there's a 100 there. That's going to take a while. Okay, so this is a shorter way to do that, but these are very specific cases. So if you're looking through these and you notice, okay, and then again, this is if you notice, today they're all going to work out this way. But when your factoring test is all mixed, you're going to need to be paying attention. So if you notice these are both perfect squares, you can at least check for this. Okay. You would take the square root of the first term and the last term. So what's the square root of 9x squared? 3x. And then the last term, what's the square root of 4? 2. Okay. So those two things check out. That is two of the three things that have to check out. So this is, again, if you notice that those are perfect squares. And then, again, any even exponent is a perfect square. Now, the middle term would have to be a very specific number for this to work out. Okay, it can't just be any number, so you'd have to check. And the way you check these are if these two multiply together, so you're going to multiply the square roots, so that'd be 3x times 2. You're going to multiply that together, and you're going to double it, multiplying it by another 2. And I'll explain why in a minute. So what is 2 times 3x times 2? 12x. Is that what the middle term is? Sine aside. Yes. Okay. So the middle term would have to be a 12x or a negative 12x. I'll show you what to do with the negative here momentarily. But those three things have to apply for this to work. If that was anything other than 12x, this would not be a perfect square trinomial, which means you have to factor by grouping. But if these three things check out, then you can jump to the binomial squared, which is your factored form. Now that factored form, you would take your first square root, which is 3x. You would take your second, or your other square root, so the last term square root. This sign goes in here. So that's where the negative would apply. And that is your answer. 3x minus 2 quantity squared, or 2 of the same thing. So the reason, I need to point this out, why this 2 is here in the first place. Let's say we hadn't noticed that. You don't have to write this down. If we did A times C, what would that be? From last week. 36. Okay, 9 times 4 is 36. What factor pair of 36 would add up to 12? 6 and 6, and they both be negative. Now, if we split that apart into 4 terms, again, you don't have to write this down. So if I split this apart into 4 terms and I factored by grouping, okay, the double, 6x, is right here. So that's why this 2 is important. It has to be 2 of the same quantity. Okay. All right. So we could factor the long way. The answer will come out the same. But if you notice that, especially for like problem D where the 100's there, that could take a little bit longer if you're not paying attention. Okay. So this is a tool. You don't necessarily have to use it. You're going to use it on your homework today. All right. So don't worry about this part. But on your homework today, I need to see square root, and then double both square roots. Okay. And then your answer, obviously. Okay. So all the trinomials today that you have will work out like this. So again, this is if you notice a 4x squared is a perfect square, and so is 25. But again, that middle term has to have that specific relationship with those. So what's the square root of 4x squared? 2x. What's the square root of 25? 5. Okay. And again, you check to make sure the middle term applies, because it can't just be anything. Okay. To be a perfect square trinomial, you'd multiply the two perfect squares together, 2x and 5, and you double it because of that matching pair. That would show up. So what's 2 times 2x times 5? 20x. Okay. So all three of these things check out. That means that that is a perfect square trinomial. So that is a special case. So you factor it into a binomial squared. The first square root and the second square root, and then the middle sign. So since everything's positive here, it'll just be 2x plus 5. It was a minus in the other one because the 12 was a negative. That is the only difference between the two. All right. So if there's any negatives floating around, it should only be the middle term. The first and the last one need to be positive. Okay. Is everyone clear? You don't have to do these this way. It's possible to do it the way that we did on Thursday, but this is a tool in case you notice it. So at least pay attention to what type of numbers you have going on. Any questions? On C, might that be a perfect square trinomial as it's written right now? Why not? Okay, couple things. Perfect squares imply even exponents. We have an odd one, so I can't take the square root of that evenly. Also, you cannot take the square root of a negative number. The leading term should never be negative as is. So we do have a GCF. What is it? Negative x. So that negative x has to come out first. Okay, just like all the time. So the signs are going to change, and then x is going to be reduced out of everything. So that'll give us a positive 9x squared, a negative 42x, and a positive 49. So now, might it be a perfect square trinomial? Could be. We don't know for sure until those three things check out. So since these two are perfect squares, we'll at least check them. So square root of 9x squared would be what? 3x. Square root of 49? 7. And then we check the middle term by multiplying those two together and doubling them. So 2 times 3x times 7. This would be 2 times 3x is 6x times 7 would be a 42x. The negative on that does not matter. The negative would just go in the parentheses. Now we have a GCF on this one. So the GCF just goes out front. So we still have a binomial squared. You just throw the negative x out front. So whatever you take out still stays out front like usual. But just don't forget about it. What's the quantity inside the parentheses? But plus or minus? Middle term sign. So if that's a negative, that is where the negative would show. Okay. So that would be read negative x times the quantity of 3x minus 7 squared. Okay. Or you'd write negative x, a 3x minus 7 in parentheses, and another 3x minus 7 in parentheses. Questions on it? Try D. This is one where likely would not want to do the long way, just with how large the numbers are. as you're working through that one, just a reminder, just because you learn this special type does not mean everything you learned last week goes out the window. This is just an additional tool to use. If the first and last term are not perfect squares, then you have to do A times C, find a factor pair that works, factor by groupings. Okay, so this is only a very specific type, and it could save you some time. Anyone have the answer for it? Riley? 10n minus 3 quantity squared. Okay. So, if you write just the answer on your paper, I'm giving you a 0 for your homework. Okay. I need to see that you took the square root. So square root of 100 is 10, and then half as many n's. Square root of 9 is 3. So those two check out as perfect squares. You multiply 10n times 3 and times 2 to double it. That'd be 30 times 2, which is 60. Okay. The reason it's minus is because the 60 is negative in the problem. So this minus sign just determines there's a minus sign over here. So the trinomials you have today, check for GCF, and otherwise they should work out like this. Okay. Now the ones on the back are different. So are there any questions before we move on to this? Is everybody clear that I should see this work on your paper for your homework? Okay. On the back, these are the third and final special case. You will need to memorize these formulas by Friday. Okay. Now, are the formulas almost the same? What's different? This is a sum of cubes, this is a difference of cubes. So this will be the original problems you get. These are the factored forms, so you'll need to know this side. The difference is where the 1 minus sign goes. The order is exactly the same. So there's an A, either plus or minus a B, and then the trinomial, which is the other factor, A squared. A times B is the middle term, and B squared is the last term. If it's a sum, the minus sign goes on the middle term of the trinomial. If it's a difference, the minus sign goes here, and everything else is positive. So as long as you memorize the order, and then where the minus sign goes in each one, which the more you do these, the better you will get at that. That actually makes it quite simple to memorize, but you're going to need to practice it. So you do need to have those memorized by Friday. I'm not giving them to you. Okay. So the way you notice if you're doing these, so we did difference of squares last week. That was a minus sign and 2 perfect squares. Now it can be a minus or a plus, and they're going to be perfect cubes, meaning you can take a third root. Now you'll notice a lot of these numbers are going to show up over and over again, so you'll learn what your cubics are. But in case you forget, I will show you on a calculator how to do that. Even if you don't have one in front of you right now, I'll at least show you how to do it, and you can write down where the buttons are, because it's not a button. You have to go into a menu. So this would be a difference of cubes. Oops. All right. Because there's a minus sign, and 8 is a cube. Okay. So this work is going to look very similar to what we just did in the front. Instead of a square root, I want you to write a third root. So you just throw a 3 out front. Now you can take a third root of any exponent that is a multiple of 3. 3, 6, 9, 12. Okay, those are all cubics. All right. The third root of x to the third. X. Just like the square root of x squared is x, the third root of x to the third is x. So if the roots and the exponent are the same, you're left with just the variable. The third root of 8. Anyone know? 2. Okay. Now as a side note, I'll show you right now where to figure that out. Okay. So all of these you should check GCF first, just FYI. If it's a difference of squares, that's the one we did last week, okay, which is very quick. But if there's no GCF and it's a binomial, at least check this if there's cubes. So if you guys don't know where a square root is, that is the second option of the x squared button. That's not what we're doing a cubed root. Okay. But if you do second x squared, that's a square root. So if you don't know your perfect squares, use that. If you need a third root and you have one of these calculators, you're gonna go to the math menu. Do you see it? Okay, it's option 4. If you do anything higher than the third root, you would use option 5, where it has a little X and you can tell it what root to do. You can do the 10th root and it'll tell you. Okay, so if you don't have a calculator in front of you and you feel like you may forget on one of these, maybe write on your paper, it's the math menu. So it's right below the green alpha button, math, and it's option 4. And it will give you a third root. Okay, and if you type in whatever that number is, it will spit out what that is. But on these, you will see the same numbers show up over and over again. So you'll probably start memorizing them a little bit. My hope is that. So, in these formulas up here, this is a difference. Okay, so we're going to use the difference one. So the a cubed minus b cubed. Now, a is the third root of the first term, b is the third root of the second term. So you guys have the formula at the top of your paper. So, as long as you know that this one's A and this one's B, you plug it in, simplify whatever you have to, then you're done. Okay. It's the nice part about a formula. Okay. But you have to determine what A is and what B is. So A is the third root of the first term, B is the third root of the second term. So one of your factors is a binomial, one is a trinomial. If that is a difference, the minus sign goes here, everything else is a plus sign. That's what I meant by figure out where the minus sign goes, and the order of them is the exact same. So the binomial, it's the a term minus the b term. So it'd be the x minus the 2. Everybody with me so far? Okay. Then the trinomial, it's the a term squared. So that would be x squared. It's plus a times b, so what would that be? Okay. X times 2 would be 2x. And then it's plus the b term squared. So it's 2 squared. 4. That's it. This is always the a term. This is always the b term. This is always a squared. This is always a times b. This is always b squared. So if you remember what goes where, and then where the 1 minus sign goes, it's either here or it's in front of the ab term, depending on if it's a difference or a sum. Other than that, the formula is exactly the same. But that is your answer. That is the factored form. It has a binomial and a trinomial. Now this one's a sum over here. So again, you're taking the third root, and I want to see it, even if you use a calculator. What's the third root of x to the third? X. What's the third root of 125? 5. Okay. Either use a calculator or break it into its prime factors. So that would be 5 times 25, and that 25 is the 2 more 5s, totaling 3 5s. Okay. But you can use a calculator, but I want to see where you're getting the numbers from. The first root is your a term, second root is your b term. This is a sum this time. So you have a binomial, that's going to have a plus sign. The only minus sign is going to go on the middle term. Okay. There's only one minus sign in each one. So if you can figure out where it goes, everything else is identical. So we have a plus b, so that'd be x plus 5 in the first one. The trinomial is the a term squared, so x squared, minus a times b, so x times 5 will be 5x. And then it's always plus the b term squared, 5 squared is 25. The more you work with the formula, the easier it will become. Okay. If you think you got it, you can work a little bit faster. I'm going to stay with those that might not be there yet. Always check for GCF. The third root of x to the third is x. What's the third root of 27? 3. Again, this is the a term, this is the b term. So as long as you can figure out what those are, just plug in and simplify. It is a sum. So where does the minus sign go? The only minus sign. In front of AB. Okay, the middle term of the trinomial. Okay. Other than that, everything's the same. So this will be a plus b, so x plus 3. And then the trinomial would be the a term squared minus a times b. Make sure to put the number first. Do not write x3. It's not the same thing. Okay, keep the coefficient in front. And then technically you would be plugging in 3 squared, but yes, you may jump straight to 9. Just to make sure that you get that number right. So that is where that's coming from. You are squaring the 3, you get a 9. Okay. I'm going to need to see this on your homework to get full credit for those. Okay. So do not just write the answer. Are these both perfect cubes? 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. 1 is a perfect everything. Okay. So, third root of x to the third would be x. As long as these are both 3, it's just whatever letter that is. The third root of 1 is 1. It is a difference, which means the minus sign goes in the first set of parentheses and everything else is positive. So do you guys see what I mean by figure out where the minus sign goes and then everything else is the same no matter what? So can anyone tell me the whole answer?
X minus 1 and x squared plus x plus 1.
Yes. A minus b, a squared plus a times b. If you want to put a 1x, that's fine. And then plus 1 squared, which is 1. Now all of those were very straightforward because their coefficient of the leading one was 1. Now the last 3, the coefficient is not. Always check for GCF first. Now there isn't one on any of these, but there are some in your homework. The third root of 8x to the third. Okay. 2x. Third root of 27 would be 3. So you guys know that there's already numbers repeating themselves. They're not going to be super large. 125 is one of the biggest ones you'll see. So you'll start to memorize them a little bit. Alright, now this is a sum, so the minus sign is going to go in the trinomial part of it. Okay. Now, if the variable or the leading one has a coefficient, you have to be really careful because you do have to square that number too. So the first one is going to be a plus b. Okay, 2x plus 3. The a, again, this is a, this is b. What is a squared?
2x.
You have to square the 2 also. 4x squared. So this is what I was referring to. If you have a coefficient on the variable, or whatever the leading term is, you have to square that 2 in the trinomial. Okay, so it's the whole 2x squared. The middle term is minus, since it's a sum. What's 2x times 3? Minus 6x, and then b squared would still be 9. So if the coefficient is something other than 1, you gotta be careful here and here. Okay. Especially careful there. Right. But you have to square the number 2. Same number, so just flip-flopped. Third root of 27x to the third is 3x. Third root of 8 would be 2. Since this is a difference, minus sign goes in the first set of parentheses. Can anyone tell me the answer? 3x.
3x.
Okay.
3x squared, 9x squared. Plus 6x.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So in case you're not sure, again, this is a minus b over here. This is a squared plus ab plus b squared. Alright. The order for all those is the same. Gates, put your phone away. Or it's going up there next time. So you have to square the 3 with the x squared too. That's where the 9's coming from. last one. Third root of 27x cubed is 3x. Third root of 125, 5. Who's got the answer? Red?
3x minus 5 and 9x squared plus 15x plus 25.
The minus is here because it's the difference. Okay, if we sum, the minus sign shifts over here. Okay. 3x squared is 9x squared. 3x times 5 and 5 squared. Okay. Who thinks they might have the formula memorized already? Okay. Now, if you don't practice it at all before Friday, you're probably not going to remember it. Okay. So all the more reason to practice it. But no, I'm not providing it for you, so make sure that you know it by then. So this is the last part of it. So if you got the factoring packet last week, it's the last page is these two. Okay. So on your homework for today, the front side is all trinomials. Still check for GCF. So that'll be like the front side of the notes. These will be the ones we just did. Sum or difference of cubes. Always check for GCF first. All right.